I'm an operating room nurse at a major medical center in the US. I've seen and done crap that makes sore look like Sesame Street. AMAA. I specialize in spine and orthopedics, trauma, and general surgeries, but have experience in pretty much every specialty. I've carried breasts in a Ziploc bag, seen a broken penis, it's a real thing, sawed off legs while the patient was awake, seen pus rocket out of rectums, plus lots of other cool stuff. Much like other superheroes, I will not reveal anything specific about patients or healthcare practitioners, nor will I reveal my location out of courtesy to current and previous co-workers who may just as soon forget all about our associations, as well as some of these stories. I'm also not here to diagnose that weird rash you've been scratching for the last 20 minutes. Otherwise, anything you've ever wanted to know about what goes on while you're pumped full of propofol and have 3 strangers wrist deep inside of you, ask away. I regret that I have but one upvote to give. In the interest of contributing, I have several questions. 1. What is the most terrifying, nerve-wracking, intense or situation you've yet been in? As in one of those life in the balance, every second counts kind of scenarios? 2. What is the worst injury you've had to help treat? 3. Conversely, what is the most relatively mundane, or perhaps common thing you see? 4. Finally, and this is maybe kind of an odd two-parter that might seem silly to ask, but I'll do anyway. What do you think of recent advances in medical technology such as the skin guns for burn victims, culture of their own skin cells, sprays on, sets in 15 minutes, is their own actual skin, the powder that regrows small removed limbs, lopped off fingers and toes and whatnot, so not sure if limbs is the right word, or the harmless wavelengths, I say because they are like X-rays, but I forget their names, and the level of radiation emitted is only a small fraction of X-rays that could possibly be used to create a portable, tricorder-like medical scanner. And what are your personal thoughts on the future of medicine, even if you may not be the proper person to be asking, unless you are, in which case, disregard that last bit. All great questions, and in exchange for your one upvote, I will give multiple answers. We had a young kid come in after a cliff diving accident. Pro tip for amateur cliff divers, don't dive headfirst until you've tested the water. 2 of his vertebrae had burst, as in shattered, and he'd already been in the ICU for a couple of hours due to the huge amounts of paperwork and indecision. We had a locums tenens surgeon on call that night. A locums is a temp, so he wasn't one of our normal staff. This surgeon was a dong, capital D, capital O, capital N, capital G. Because of the nature of the injury, we had to put in a breathing tube while the kid was still awake, which is nerve-wracking under good circumstances, and becomes even more difficult when the patient is young, hypothermic, scared as heck, has a broken neck, is in a cervical collar, and is still covered in sand from the beach. The icing on this crap cake was that the surgeon came into the room and started yelling that it was too warm to operate, and until we called the room off, he refused to pick up a scalpel. While he's going on his sweaty-browed tirade, this kid is still completely awake and fully aware that if we don't get working ASAP, he may become a quadriplegic in a hurry. We eventually got the kid off to sleep okay, but wound up having to call in one of our regular neurosurgeons because our temp decided this was more than he signed up for, the anesthesiologist, and I reported the heck out of him after the case was done, and he was eventually banned from working in our hospital. Unfortunately, because of some very crafty HR laws, we're not allowed to let other hospitals know what a bag of dirt he is. 2. It's tough to classify worst. I'd had to hold a guy's fingers in my hand after he sawed them off with a circular saw. We got them reattached. There's the M-Taint story. Seriously, with naming skills like yours, you should write song titles for these guys. There was another guy who had gangrene of the testicles and buttocks, so all the flesh between his legs had basically rotten away down to the muscle and bone, and one testicle was like hanging out. There's lots of different kinds of injuries, so that's a tough call. The cases I like the least are called DNC or D&E, dilation and curettage, or dilation and evacuation. It's when the fetus dies for some reason, and then we have to go in and remove it before it becomes infected and harms the mother. Those are the worst, not because the procedure is so difficult but because of the emotions. It's not a universal rule, but my experience has always been that the mothers are so friendly and kind when you have to go interview them, and the fathers are usually in the corner privately losing their crap. There's so much hurt and anger and confusion and pain involved in losing a child. I feel like even though my presence is needed, it's still a horrible intrusion. 3. Most mundane, either a gallbladder or appendix removal, or a total knee hip replacement. At my last hospital, we'd bang out 4 or 5 joints in a day like it was our job. Which, I mean, never mind. We did a lot of them. 4. I like to think I am kind of a good person to ask this question to. Big surgeries leave a lot of odd downtime, so to fill the dead space, I have subscriptions to a lot of journals, and there's been a lot lately on the skin guns and the gadgets you're talking about. I think all of it is really cool technology. We're finally at the stage in medicine that some of the stuff we saw in Star Trek is going to be in hospitals within the next decade. But I think it's probably going to take the better part of a decade before any of that stuff is ready for commercial use. And simply because of the costs involved in growing petri dishes of your own skin or toes or whatever, I think it will be a long time before you can just swing by your local Walgreens and pick up some Skillegro. As far as the direction of medicine in general, I think we're going to see 2 shifts in technology. We're going to get much better at working with the body's natural capabilities in terms of regeneration, recognizing and combating disease, etc. Already, a lot of total joint replacement companies are building artificial joints that are custom fit to the patient. Secondly, I think we're going to continue the general movement towards making everything less and less invasive. Sometime, Google the Da Vinci robot or stealth neurosurgery, and that'll give you an idea of what we're talking about. The stealth has been around for more than 10 years, actually, but the Da Vinci is still pretty new. I'm surprised you haven't got more questions. Nurses are amazing. Do you ever get to the point where you think, stupidity does not get sympathy? What is the saddest things you've seen? And the saddest thing I've seen was a bus full of kids coming back from a church camp that blew onto its side on a windy stretch of highway. The bus was doing close to 60 miles per hour, and several of the kids had arms or legs get caught outside, between the bus windows and the ground. Since we were the trauma center for the area, we got the 3 worst cases, and I worked on 2 of them. They were sisters, maybe 12 and 8, I can't remember, just one older and one younger. All it said on both their charts was road rash and abrasions. I transported both of them back to the OR, the younger one kept asking about the older, and the older never made a whimper. When we finally had the older one off to sleep, I pulled back the covers to begin my prep, and finally understood the extent of the damage. I could see straight through the skin and muscle to this girl's hip bone. Her entire leg had been trapped against the asphalt, with glass and gravel rubbing off muscle and skin until not much was left but a pure white streak of bone showing through. The other 2 nurses left the room. They both had kids and started crying immediately. The plastic surgeon I was working with said it was okay if I needed to leave, but he had to debride the leg, which is a process where we basically use sandpaper to strip off the rest of the dead tissue before it becomes infected. I stayed, and there have been few occasions where I've had more admiration than I did for that man. What sticks with me to this day is that those girls were warriors. Goddamn. Stone cold warriors. Both of them had enough gashes and open holes that they would have been completely within their rights to scream their lungs out, regardless of pain medications. Instead, they just laid back on their stretchers and asked if the other was okay. I just hope if something like that ever happens to me, I've got the stones to lie quietly and ask about someone else. This has been the most interesting AMA I've read in a while. Just out of curiosity, why didn't you go to med school? You were just not interested in being a surgeon or what? I'm very glad you've enjoyed it. Honestly, I thought med school was out of my reach. Then I graduated nursing school, started working, and realized that doctors aren't gods. They are just really smart people who worked really hard to get where they are. At my last hospital, I was actually approached by several surgeons and anesthesiologists, including our department head, and told that I needed to go. I'd always planned on getting a master's of nursing in some kind of clinical specialty, but now I'm very seriously looking into medical school too. Right now the only thing holding me back is knowing how far in debt it puts you. The average doc needs to enter a specialty average more than $300,000 a year in order to break into middle class financial status. When you take into account how much debt they graduate with a price tag like that, your specialty options become much more limited, and I'm not sure that I'm particularly interested in the fields that would remain open to me. Most unusual thing you've taken out of someone? Baby carrots out of a bladder. Happened on both a man and a woman. Separate occasions. But I've always wondered if they knew each other. We've found a sewing needle buried inside a woman's fat rolls. We once had a guy get an adult so far up his rectum that we had to cut him open from the front and milk it out by hand. The team in the room at the time took bets on what color it was. Tell us about the crazies that come in. My good crazy stories all happened when I was a CNA, still in nursing school. Since I'm a bigger guy, 5 minutes and 10 seconds 230 pounds and played O-line in high school, I got picked up by the psych team to do what we call one-on-ones. Basically, when someone can't be left alone for fear of them doing harm to themselves, they get a one-on-one. Drug withdrawals, hallucinations, suicide watch, physically threatening to the staff. That's where I came in. I worked night shifts, so most of the time, these people were drugged and just slept through the night. But the ones that didn't, my god. I had an 84-year-old woman wake up at 3 in the morning, and without having ever met me or knowing who I was or why this big guy was just chilling in her hospital room, she very calmly said to me, "Take me back." I thought for a minute, and then asked back, where she rolled her eyes at me like I was just absolutely the dumbest person she'd met that day, and replied very matter-of-factly, "Earth," rolled over and went right back to sleep. Didn't hear a peep for the next 4 hours. When I went home, had an 85-year-old guy who had a bad reaction to his medication and started having hallucinations. Unfortunately, rather than seeing a friendly giant rabbit, he thought that myself and 3 other nurses were Nazi SS sent to interrogate him, and a Foley catheter currently draining his bladder was some kind of torture device. That aging Navy man was held down in 4-point restraints, had me literally on top of his chest, another CNA draped across his legs, and 2 more nurses trying to hold down his arms, and he still managed to drag a 3-diameter balloon out through his penis. Blood and urine spraying everywhere, and this sailor just kept screaming, "I'll never talk, say what you will about the Navy." But this mother was not to be trifled with. My mom was in rehab after a surgery to fix 2 aneurysms. Surgeon did something that apparently caused her to stroke. He would never come right out and say that, but when a person loses movement on their right side during neurosurgery, 1 + 1 = 2 is not hard math. Anyway, during rehab, she was getting better and was stable. One day a nurse put a BP cuff over the PICC line in her right arm. A few hours later she died after her brain began bleeding. Do hospitals ever look into that sort of thing? Trying to troubleshoot WTF happened, or is it like, well, if the family isn't asking questions, neither are we situation? PS. Or and intensive care nurses are the best people in the freaking world. Thanks for being awesome and saving lives. I'm very sorry to hear that. Hospitals absolutely do look into things like that, at multiple levels of the hierarchy. We call something like this a sentinel event, and it triggers house-wide reviews of policies, procedures, and protocols to see exactly what went wrong, and where along the way could we have stopped it from doing so. I obviously can't speak to what happened in your case, but I know that if something like that happened in our department, there would be weeks of meetings, reviews, committees, and probably the roll out of new procedures to make it even more difficult for someone to ever make that mistake again. It's especially frustrating for families because, thanks to some especially sinister loopholes in medical law, even if we know what happened, we usually can't say anything about it, so we wind up giving very odd, vague statements like what I'm sure your surgeon gave you. Painful for families, painful for healthcare workers. Everyone on our end just wishes we could tell you exactly what happened. PS. You seem pretty freaking awesome too. Please have my upvote. What is the biggest mistake you have made on the job? How did you cope with the consequences? Probably the biggest mistake I've made thus far was screwing up an instrument count. For every procedure with a large enough opening, we do a total count of every sponge, every strip of gauze, and every instrument that touches the patient. At the end of the case, we count everything again to make sure everything that went in, came back out. The nurse is responsible for keeping an accurate tally of all of this, and then documenting that it happened. On one case, I screwed up the tally. We were off by 1 needle. which means we had possibly left it inside of the patient. Fortunately, there are several fail-safes built into the system. First, we never throw away packaging, so if need be, we can go back and count how many packages of needles we open up and then compare it to the count. Second, we can get an X-ray of the patient. This isn't 100% accurate, as we sometimes use very small needles, but it's a hell of a lot easier than cutting someone back open. In the end, the needle had fallen on the floor, and we wound up being okay. But losing track of the count like that is a serious faux pas, and I felt horrible. Everybody was cool about it though. They just kept their cool, went to plan B, and in the end, everything was fine. In terms of consequences, there really weren't any. We knew what went wrong. We knew how to fix it for next time, and there was no harm done to the patient. American healthcare is relatively consistent in not meting out punishment for honest mistakes. If we had missed the needle, and it turned out to be still inside the patient and no one had caught the mistake, then there would have been an investigation of some kind, and things would have proceeded from there. Do you have many ethical dilemmas? For example, one person attacks another and ends up injured as well. You have to treat all patients the same whether they are victims or attackers, right? Everyone gets the same level of treatment, regardless. I've personally never come across a scenario where an attacker and victim came in simultaneously, but for our department at least, both would be treated in standard fashion and whoever had the more serious injuries would be treated first. A lot of ethical dilemmas in healthcare are just good exercises and thought for the individual. Particularly tricky cases are managed by an ethics board, which is present in every hospital. But for us, usually it's an emergency scenario, and our number one concern is always the preservation of life and limb. So if there's a way we can do that, we do it. One of the more interesting scenarios was when we had an 8-person specialty team got called in to save a guy who had tried, and failed, to commit suicide. I offered, and was promptly ripped apart for suggesting that since he had stabbed himself multiple times, were we sure that he actually wanted to be saved? My logic was that if we were going to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars trying to save someone, maybe we should save someone who hadn't purposely poked themselves full of holes with the exact opposite intention. But in healthcare, such considerations are irrelevant, and we're going to save you whether you like it or not. Whoa, you weren't embellishing about the whole pus rocketing out of rectum thing. Appetite successfully ruined, permanently. Have you had days where you thought, I need a new career? Number. Definitely had days where I thought holy FSM, I need a nap, but never a new career. I'm actually considering going on to medical school, so we'll see what happens. And no, I hope you believe that while I was graphic, all that actually happened. I would love to do what you do. What did you do to land a job in the or is it just another program after your BSN? How did you prepare to get into the program? How competitive is it to land a job in the or? I actually graduated nursing school at about the same time that the major hospitals in my area were slashing their nursing workforces due to the Great Recession of '08. It was us versus them, and us was getting our asses kicked. But I had worked summer and winter breaks at the hospital in my hometown as a CNA and built up some good contacts. So when my old manager found out I'd graduated, he offered to pass around my resume. It was largely timing after that. Our or happened to be in taking a new class of RNs to their perioperative training program. Google the AORN education curriculum to see what that's like. That's the program we used. Since I was a new grad, I had to sign a 2-year contract and the rest is history. The program itself generally runs about 12 weeks for just the circulating nurse portion, and about another 12 weeks for the scrub nurse portion. Circulating is where you set the room up, operative or non-sterile equipment, coordinate with anesthesia, apply dressings, patient interviews, etc. Basically, anything you don't see on Grey's Anatomy is covered under circulating. Scrubbing is where you actually stand next to the surgeon and hand off instruments. That's the stuff most people are familiar with. In terms of preparation, or nursing, or perioperative nursing, is nothing like floor nursing. You become a skilled equipment operator from day one. You have to be able to pick up very quickly on new information, and be flexible, because you are responsible for coordinating the team for that day, surgeon, anesthesiologist, other nurses or scrub techs, and any students who may be observing assisting. It also helps a lot to be able to put your ego on the shelf and just do what's best for the patient and team. It can get pretty competitive, depending on your location. Major metropolitan areas like Seattle or San Fran have groups of hospitals that go together to train a group of nurses, and then decide which ones they want to hire. Smaller hospitals, like where I started, run their own programs based off of an approved curriculum. Generally, it helps to have a year of critical care or experience, or in my case, to have an employment history with a few managers that can vouch for you. Have you ever witnessed an instances of negligence by a surgeon? How often did it happen and how bad was it? It wasn't in my room, but I was next door when we had a cardiac surgeon leave a sponge inside a patient. We use special gauze that has a wire threaded through the weave, so if one goes missing at the end of the case, we can shoot an X-ray of the patient and it'll show up. They shot the X-ray. The radiologist confirmed that the sponge was inside of the patient. The surgeon argued that the patient was actually laying on top of it, and in spite of protestations, he closed up the patient and sent them out. Did the exact same thing not a week later. I heard later that he tried to claim that somehow he hadn't been fully informed of the situation, which was a very unfortunate line of BS. Management later installed microphones and video cameras in every room. For educational reasons, they told us. How's the relationship between the nurses and the surgeons? Is your hospital a teaching hospital? If so, how's the relationship between the students and the nurses? Healthcare in general attracts strong personalities, and it's been my experience that the OR is a particular magnet. There's always a few nurses and a few docs that just like to be obstinate, but by and large, you couldn't ask for a more intelligent, harder working group of individuals. There's no way to weed out every bad egg, but by and large, if you get wheeled into an operating room, you can rest assured that you are in the hands of people who have made the conscious decision to be freaking amazing at their chosen field. I do work at a teaching hospital, and the students are incredibly helpful. I don't know if this is part of their curriculum or something they're told on day one, but my god, if we get any more of them they're going to put me out of a job. I originally started at a private hospital, no students, and when I shifted to my new job, my preceptor had to literally pull me back and tell me you have to stop doing everything. They're here to learn. Just supervise them. Hey, I'm 15 and I'm aspiring to go into the healthcare field, and I'd love to pursue a career in either the ED or ICU. I currently have a volunteer job in the ED of a hospital working like 24 hours a week. Do you think I'm off to a good start? I'd appreciate all the tips you can give me on pursuing a med degree. I think you're off to a great start. There is no substitute for experience, and working in the emergency department is gonna put you smack in the middle of things, both good and bad. I'd recommend arranging for a shadow day in the OR to follow either a surgeon or a nurse to see what it's like to be in their day-to-day. Academically, don't shy away from sciences. You'll need them for college. More than anything, know why you're doing this. The money isn't great anymore, with the exception of a few medical specialties, so you need to be at least a little crazy about the career you pick, because you're going to spend more than 1/3 of the rest of your life doing it. If the thought of being in the OR or ICU doesn't get you at least a little pumped, then it's not the place for you, and there are 1,000 other cool jobs out there. But if it does, then friend, we can use all the help we can get. Congratulations on your volunteer spot, and welcome to the family. There's a lot of us, and we're all our own little flavor of crazy, but by the gods, we do some really cool crap. My mother has handled catastrophic workers' compensation insurance claims for almost 15 years now. She spends all day reading about and talking to people who were accidents that resulted in brain injuries, paralysis and even death. Saying she is constantly, obsessively worried about potential accidents is the understatement of the year. Does your constant exposure to traumatic injuries, that often resulted from everyday activities, make you more cautious than the average person who doesn't think about getting hurt? Yes and no. I'll explain. I was diagnosed with bone cancer a few years ago, and decided to take up powerlifting, because frick science and logic. It's worked out beautifully, and along the way, I've met a couple others like me who were given crippling diagnoses and just said frick it, and wound up being right. So I personally believe that a little dose of denial may be just what the nurse ordered, which is, legally speaking, no substitute for whatever your doctor orders. I think the human body is unbelievably resilient, and I understand that we see the 1% of the population that actually requires intervention. So in that regard, no, my work doesn't really change how I view the world. But the first hospital I worked at was the same hospital that both of my parents worked at, so everyone who knows me knew them first. My parents are both master's level nurses, and it's infinitely more difficult to come up with an innocuous alibi as to why it burns when you pee when both of your parents have full access to your medical records. So in that regard, yes, I'm much more cautious, at least when I'm visiting home. This is a great read. I'm a recent nursing graduate, and I'm about to take the boards. I never really thought about working in the OR, but maybe I should. Do you have any tips for finding a job if I don't have any direct connections in a hospital? I'm an EMT, so maybe that'll help a little. Are there other specialties units where you would enjoy working besides the OR? I have a lot in common with a used car salesman, so any unit where the patients come and go very quickly. Or ICU are the only other two I have any interest in, and I've spent brief periods in both. Congrats on graduation, and good luck with the boards. When job hunting, and there isn't a font size big enough to emphasize this, forget human resources. Go straight to the manager or charge nurses in the departments you're interested in and talk to them, even if it's just to arrange a shadow or conversation. Dress like a boss and take a spiffy resume with you. I interviewed at multiple top tier hospitals where the HR rep told me flat out we're not hiring anyone right now at the start of the meeting, and walked out with a full-time offer on the table after talking to your manager. Mayo Clinic Scottsdale, for example. Just call into the department and ask to talk to the manager or supervisor or whoever is available. Get a foot in the door, because these are the people who actually know whether or not there's an opening at that moment. HR will find out what they need to. Do you ever have problems with obese patients? I have a friend who works in medical transport, and overweight people are her biggest difficulty. Obese patients are difficult for a few reasons. We need bigger instruments to even reach the problem areas. We have to upgrade our tables and stretchers. My current OR department has several that are rated to hold up to 1,000 pounds. And they're considering phasing out all the beds that hold less than 750 lbs. There are greater safety risks involved with moving and positioning the patient, both for the staff and the patient. Moving 300 pounds of obesity is a very tricky, very difficult thing. They require a lot more medications, and they often come with a long list of accompanying conditions like back pain, asthma, COPD, frequent bladder infections, osteoporosis, etc., most which all source back to their obesity. I have to ask, my fiancée is tending medical school or something like that. She's planning becoming a doctor. By the time she's done with school and whatnot, it'll have been on the state police force for almost 7 years. My question is this: will I ever get to see my future wife at home? Also, if it helps, we'll both be looking at third shift. Yes, you'll see her. No, not very much. At least not while she's in residency and fellowship. And if she signs on with a place that's understaffed or underserved, it'll be long hours. Is a very grueling place to work. Whether you're an EMT, tech, nurse, doc, doesn't matter. My dad has worked in emergency medicine for years, and even though he's a partner with his group, we just understand that every year, he is going to miss some holidays. For some people, that's a big deal. For us, it never mattered. If he's not home on the 25th for Christmas, then we open presents on the 24th. It's not the date that matters, it's the people. The fact that you're both working the same shift, and both are in public service professions is going to give you strong ground in terms of understanding the hectic demands of your respective lives. I applaud and thank you both for what you do. You've been visited by the good sleep oinker. You will be blessed with cozy, restful sleeps, but only if you Codgeman sleep tight porker. Thanks for watching. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video, or don't. Either way, have a great day, you magnificent people.